insurance through their private company. It's more generous in the sense that you don't have a deductible. It's more generous in the sense that your copays are almost non-existent. It's sometimes more generous in that it offers coverage for things like glasses that frequently, if you have a private sector employer, they don't cover. Even the state of Wisconsin doesn't cover glasses. As the result, employers reported to me that when their employees get off the private sector plan and go on the Badger Care, they're going to doctors more frequently than they have been in the past. Governor Walker has asked for the flexibility in Badger Care to have his Secretary of Health go to the federal government and say, wait a minute, we're not going to offer every little thing under Badger Care, because Wisconsin is one of the most generous states in the country as far as what they offer on Badger Care and Medicaid. He also wants to have his secretary have the ability to ask for co-pays. And if you talk to healthcare providers, one of the complaints that they have is that sometimes people on Badger Care or on the government will kind of recklessly show up at the doctor all the time because it's not costing them anything. And I think Governor Walker feels, or I hope he feels, that if people have to pay a little more every time that they go to the doctor themselves, $10 or $20 or $30 or what have you, maybe they won't be running to the doctor so much, and maybe the cost overruns on Badger Care won't be as much. There are other provisions in this budget as well, but I think those are the two provisions that we've seen the most about. The requirement that employees pay for more of their health care, the requirement that they pay for their pension, and the Badger Care. And I think that's what most of the debates you will see on the floor of the State Assembly tomorrow is going to revolve around those issues. And when we ever get this bill to the floor of the State Senate, I expect the debate will revolve around those issues again. Now, you're showing me something.
4K.
Oh, 4K. I don't know whether Governor Walker is going to deal with this. I don't think he's going to deal with it, but you should be aware of four-year-old kindergarten, which is something I've been in the paper on. It would seem to me that we're in the budget crisis we're currently on. One of the first things you do is you say, okay, look, the state's fiscal shape has gotten worse over the last 10 years. Are there any new things that have been added in the last 10 years that we weren't paying for 10 years ago? During the last 10 years, Wisconsin has had a huge increase in the number of districts which provide four-year-old kindergarten. I think four-year-old kindergarten has been in the city of Sheboygan longer than that, but I'm sure there are other surrounding school districts that you may be members of that have added four-year-old kindergarten. There are some studies that I assume out there are favorable to 4K. But the studies that I am most familiar with show that four-year-old kindergarten is not beneficial. And when I think back when I was a child, I can see why the studies show what it shows. You can teach a 4-year-old child to read, you can teach a 5-year-old child to read, you can teach a 6-year-old child to read. And I remember when I was in first grade, there were kids whose parents taught them to read before I went to school. However, by the time those kids are in 3rd or 4th grade, they're all the same. In a very high-profile study, Oklahoma had like the gold standard for 4-year-old kindergarten. They put a lot of money into it, they met all the benchmark standards, and Oklahoma's reading scores since they went to 4-year-old kindergarten have dropped. Now that doesn't always happen, but it's interesting to see with their well-funded program it hasn't improved the reading scores. Wisconsin, as the result right now, is one of the leaders in the country as far as the percentage of 4-year-olds who are in kindergarten. One of the reasons we have gone to 4-year-old kindergarten, and many superintendents will tell you this in the quiet of their own office, is the way state aid works is we allow every school district to spend up to a certain cap. And that cap is a multiplier of the amount of money you are spending per pupil times the number of pupils you have. Okay? And every year that cap goes up and down. Until this point, the cap always goes up. Like they may tell the Sheboygan School District, next year or this year you can spend $200 more per child than last year. And we count all the kids in the school and multiply it times an amount, $9,000, $9,500, $10,000, whatever, to see how much the Sheboygan schools can spend. And perhaps a flaw in that formula, which has been in existence since 1993, every child counts the same. But anybody who manages a school district knows that it's much more expensive to educate a senior in high school than a 6 or 7 or 4-year-old, because it requires a lot more equipment in high school. As the result, if you're trying to balance a school budget, you want more 7 or 6 or 5 or 4-year-olds and less 17 or 18-year-olds. And as the result, to make it easier to balance their budget, over the last 20 years, a lot of districts, first of all, went from half-day kindergarten, 5-year-old kindergarten, to all-day 5-year-old kindergarten, and now have introduced 4-year-old kindergarten. Right now, 4-year-old kindergarten is costing the state of Wisconsin about it's costing about $220 million a year. Now, you may have heard your local school superintendents, and I met with a few of them this morning, complaining that they don't have enough money to do what they want in high school or do what they want in middle school. It would seem to me, if they are genuinely right in that, it would be better to take the money from 4-year-old kindergarten, which many districts have only put in there to get the additional spending authority, and take that money and spend it in the middle school or high schools. And as the result, I've called for changing the aid formula not to encourage 4-year-old kindergarten anymore. I believe Scott Walker's not going to listen to me, so you all can be happy.
Very happy.
Scott Walker would rather do whatever else Scott Walker's doing in the budget. But I do think in the long run, for the good of our society, we should not have the government paying for 4-year-old kindergarten, which I think the studies will show over time is not effective. I will also point out that the federal government pays for something called Head Start. Sometimes what I hear from people is they say, okay, Glenn, on 4-year-old kindergarten, maybe some children don't need 4-year-old kindergarten, but what about those children of the poor, bad parents, which anything would be better than keeping them with their parents? And assuming there are parents out there that are so bad we have to get them away from their parents, there is a federally funded program called Head Start. And Head Start is a program primarily for low-income students, also some students who test poorly and they feel need a Head Start. A couple things about Head Start. First of all, Head Start is federally funded, so we don't have to pay for it. Head Start also is non-union, which is why, frequently the teachers union would rather have 4-year-old kindergarten than Head Start. The other thing about Head Start is, despite the fact that it's been around for about 40 to 45 years, studies do not, once again, show that it's particularly effective, which shows one more time that, and it shouldn't be that difficult to show it's effective, would it? I mean, you would figure there's so many districts that might have 4-year-old kindergarten, one does, the other doesn't, that, if it was effective, the studies would show it, but it just isn't panning out. There's one other thing I want to tell you when you talk about Wisconsin schools. When I was growing up, Wisconsin schools were perceived to be some of the best in the country. And lately, we've been having some problems on our test scores. And I wasn't aware of this until recently. It was pointed out to me by some members of the School Boards Association. You would figure, and I'll remind you, that Wisconsin has some of the highest percentage of 4-year-olds right now going to 4-year-old kindergarten in the country. And this is something that's evolved over the last 20 years. But every year, there is something called the NAEP test scores, which are done nationwide. And we can compare different states on these test scores. When I was growing up, we always heard Wisconsin had great test scores. On the most recent 4th grade test scores that I have, which is 2008, maybe there's some new ones I'm not aware of that have come out. They break down these test scores by race, which I hate, but that's the way the liberals who keep track of these things do today. They have to keep track of everything by race. For 4th grade kids in the state of Wisconsin, the black kids are doing the worst of any of the 50 states in the country for 4th grade reading scores. For white kids, you know where we are? Just a little bit below average, which is kind of frightening, because when I was growing up, we thought of Wisconsin being in great shape. We didn't think of, the kids being a little less than average on 4th grade reading scores. So you have to ask yourself, why is that? And why is it, despite the fact Wisconsin has such a high percentage of 4-year-old kindergartners, if that's so good, how come all of a sudden we've slid to less than the national average if it was so great? You gotta think about it. Well, so you wanted me to talk about 4-year-old kindergarten, talk about 4-year-old kindergarten. Oriana, what else do you want me to talk about? What else did you bring me over here for? Oh, we can take some questions, sure. We got, well, I'll get to